Welcome to our brief explanation of sources of the law. This is Lisa. I play lots of roles here at the Hofstra Law Library. We will be exploring this chart, which is designed to help you keep track of these sources. You can find this chart on our 1L Law Library Survival Guide. What we see as the law, here in quotation marks, is often referred to as primary authority. Primary authority, of course, is distinguished from secondary sources. Secondary sources will help explain the law, help you find the law, but the law that we all must obey is the primary authority that we will be discussing here. The law is created by government, of course. Here in the US, we have a federalism system. So that means we have several levels of government. So here in the US, we have the federal government. So the federal law is going to cover all 50 states. We, of course, have the different state governments, the law in each state will only cover that state and will not be applicable in any other states. In some places, we also have municipal laws. These are large cities like New York City. So New York City has some of its own laws that are only applicable in New York City. To keep things less confusing, we're just going to focus on federal and New York law. So let's focus on our chart here on sources of the law. In this left-hand column, we have our description. So we can see that our U.S. Constitution establishes the structure of government on the federal level. And of course, the New York State Constitution establishes the government in New York State. The government is made up of course, three branches. So we have the legislative branch, which creates statutes, the executive branch, which creates regulations, and the judicial branch, which creates cases. Let's start our focus on the legislative branch. The legislative branch on the federal level, of course, is comprised by Congress. That's the House of Representatives and the Senate. In New York, the legislative branch is comprised of the Assembly and the Senate. So the legislative branch creates statutes or statutory law. You will find those statutes as they are created in something called session laws, and that's just a chronological arrangement, starting with number 1 in the beginning of the year, going through to the end. These session laws, of course, go back to 1789 when our country was first founded. So as you can imagine, some of those statutes from 100, 200, even 50 years ago may not be in force. As lawyers, most of the time, we are interested in the legislation that is currently in force. And as our chart indicates here, you will find that legislation currently in force in something called a code. The other nice thing about a code is that it's arranged by subject, so we can do our research on a particular area of law. For federal statutory law, you will find that in something called the United States Code. You can see the abbreviations here. So again, the statutes in the United States Code are applicable in all 50 states. For New York legislation, you will find that in the New York Code, lawyers in New York tend to refer to the New York Code in as McKinney's. You can also find it in another source called CLS, but even then the lawyers still call that McKinney's. And again, these are the New York legislation currently in force will be in the McKinney's Code. Let's move on to the second branch, the executive branch. And the executive branch consists of the president and the different agencies. The executive branch creates regulations. Let's take a quick look at what I mean by those agencies. So on the federal level, you can see here on this website from the Library of Congress, lists some of the agencies. So we see the Department of Agriculture, Department of Commerce, Department of Defense, and you can see some of the subdivisions of the agency. So of course the military is within the Department of Defense, moving here Department of Energy, and so forth. Back here on our chart, you can see similar to statutory legislation, regulations are also originally published in a chronological publication, but again, for regulations that are currently in force, we want to look at a code, this time of regulations rather than statutes. And sure enough, here on the federal level, we will be looking in the Code of Federal Regulations for those regulations that are issued by the agencies. Similarly, on the state level, we also have state agencies. You can see an example here on the state government, New York State government website, a listing of these agencies. And you will find the regulations issued by the New York State agencies in something called the NYCRR. Just be very careful. Don't get confused by that abbreviation and think NYC stands for New York City. It does not. It actually stands for the New York Code Rules and Regulations. Last, but certainly not least, we have the judicial branch. And of course, the judicial branch is what produces cases. There are 3 levels of courts typically. So you have the first level, trial courts, where you first bring a court case. If the losing party wants to appeal, they will go to an appellate court. And if that losing party wants to appeal, they'll go to the highest court. On the federal level, the trial court is known as federal district courts. The appellate courts, courts of appeals. Here in New York, we are in the Second Circuit. The country is divided up into 13 circuits. And then finally, the highest court in the land is the United States Supreme Court. In New York, the names aren't quite as intuitive. For whatever reason, New York calls its lowest level, the trial court, the Supreme Court. The next level up, where the losing party would appeal, is the appellate division. And then the highest court in New York is the Court of Appeals. Throughout this chart, you may have noticed some of the abbreviations. Sometimes the most challenging part of doing legal research and reading legal materials is figuring out what all of the legal abbreviations mean. So here on our 1L Survival Guide chart, we also have a listing of these abbreviations, which hopefully will help you out should you get confused. I hope now you have a better understanding of the sources of the law for both federal and New York. If you have any questions, please come to one of our research guides and contact us any way that you like. Good luck.